On this edition of Sightings, something is riding this scenic railway line, and it's leaving passengers and workers frightened and confused.
It's haunted by something that wants to find peace.
The haunting story of the mystery on board, the Spirit of Oregon.
Their spirit would not rest until the truth was known about that damn wreck.
Then, was the most powerful and mysterious explosion the world has ever known the result of one man's misguided genius?
It boils down to the fact that Tesla had the death ray.
Later, the man who started the controversy sets the record straight about the alien autopsy film.
Let me just make one point very clear. I have no interest in the subject of UFOs or the paranormal.
And Mercy Brown's horrible secret.
It was a spirit that was in the grave, draining the life of the living.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. According to legend, Halloween is the one night of the year when the dead are allowed to come out to play. To keep the evil spirits away from the living, we're supposed to wear scary masks and costumes and place a grinning jack-o'-lantern on the doorstep. These are the traditional talismans of Halloween. But in one small town in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to take more than a carved pumpkin to keep away the ghosts who ride an old steam train called the Spirit of Oregon. For passengers, a ride through Oregon's coastal mountains on this great old train is a trip through history where the rails have a story to tell. But one chapter in the story is disturbing, the story of a great train wreck and its victims who seem to have come aboard the Spirit of Oregon, perhaps because she is one of the very last of a dying breed.
The Spirit of Oregon is very much alive.
5 years ago, this was the Spirit of Oregon, a great hulking piece of Americana rusting on the scrap heap. Vicki Steele took this picture before the restoration began.
My husband has refurbished rail cars for the last 12 years. And one day he decided that we should have our own dinner train, so he built it, and now it's here.
All aboard!
The Spirit of Oregon carries its passengers along a scenic 50-mile route, then stops just short of an old bridge before returning home. And some people have come to believe that it is this route that has caused apparitions to appear in the coaches and on this photograph.
We were showing the before pictures that we took of the train, and one of the gentlemen said, "Hey, you've got a ghost in your picture," and we kind of scuffed at it because all you could see was a blue haze.
But from its maiden voyage on, there were also personal encounters with strange forces that seemed to be targeting the train's staff people.
There was a bartender on the train that would have glasses blow up in his hand, or, you know, dishes will fly off, or chairs will get jerked out from underneath you.
We had a lot of really strange things happen. Beating on the walls on our offices when there's nobody out here. And we'll see people walking through the trains when we know the train's locked up and it has a security system on it.
When you catch something in the corner of your eye, you always look back. When I looked back, it was like somebody had taken ice water and shot it through from my head to my toes. It was just a real cold, cold feeling.
And some people have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, despite the train's smooth ride and hospitable interior.
I can honestly say that that's probably the most depressed I have ever been in my life.
Michael and Sharon Palmer had been invited on the train for a special anniversary dinner. It was August 6th, 1995, a date Michael will never forget.
I was overcome by this overwhelming depression. It was like a despair, an emptiness. Suddenly a realization came to me that the feelings I'd been having must be very similar to the feelings that someone has just before they're going to die. And actually I broke down. I started to cry at that time.
Michael Palmer did not understand why he was experiencing those unnatural emotions, but somehow he felt it was connected to the railroad's past and the photograph.
We could see it was changing. We couldn't understand it at first, and then as it kept getting clearer and clearer, we happened to mention it to a gentleman by the name of Edmund Stone.
I started to wonder, I know it sounds strange, if perhaps there was a reason it was happening at that time. What's your name?
Stone is a producer for a Portland television station. He and director-camera operator Wade Evans produced a TV special about the strange happenings on the Spirit of Oregon. Their first trip on the train occurred on August 6, 1994, 1 year to the day before Michael Palmer's emotional ride.
Yeah, I felt something was inside of me trying to get out, actually. Then I started feeling emotional. Tears were rolling down my eyes. I felt very sad.
Towel or the lavatory and get a cold towel?
In fact, I actually threw up and had to and got weak. Couldn't stand for a moment.
Take some deep breaths. You all right?
Like Palmer, Evans felt that he was being targeted by an unseen force with an important message.
Since I was trying to record the images that were happening in the train at that time, I was more sort of a conduit for anything else that wanted to be recorded, perhaps.
But what was the message? Why had these two men been transformed by an inexplicable sense of dread? And why did both incidents happen on August the 6th?
And the more I looked into it, the more I thought if there's a reason that things are happening, maybe it's connected with a train crash.
In fact, on August 6, 1935, on the same rails where the Spirit of Oregon rides today, there was a devastating accident. A bridge collapsed and 5 men died, including the father of Mary Jane Walker.
Unbeknownst to them that all the support had been taken away from the trestle.
The train stopped before the bridge, but railroad workers waved the freight train on.
And they didn't even get all the way over, and it went down like a deck of cards.
They had 112 feet to fall. They probably had something in the region of about 10 to 15 seconds of realization they were going to die a horrible death.
The rails simply fell away below the wheels of the train. 5 men, including Mary Jane's father, died in slow motion. The brakeman was found clutching the brake in his hand with a death grip so strong he had to be buried with the brake in his hand.
Is it possible that perhaps in that last moment they understood that sadness of death? And is it possible that that feeling is being transmitted 60 years later through my cameraman and my friend? I don't know. That sounds far-fetched, but it might also be an explanation.
An accident report absolved the railroad of responsibility, and the families of the victims were quietly given cash settlements.
And that's been the way it's been for 60 years. And when we start to look, we realize, hey, maybe this wasn't such an accident after all. Maybe there was negligence. Maybe if these presences on the train are trying to tell us something, then what if they were trying to tell us, hey, look at this, because we shouldn't have died?
When Stone first began discussing these conclusions, the ghost image in the photo was, again, becoming more pronounced. And not only was the original photo changing, all the copies of the photo were changing too.
You could see where they had the old-fashioned blue railroad shirt and the old-fashioned vest, and then you could actually start seeing a lantern hanging down.
As the images continued to develop, we showed the photo to Mary Jane Walker, who had ridden that very train with her father so many years ago. She saw 3 clear images.
Oh, yes, I immediately recognized Ted Johnson, the engineer. And then there was the man holding the lantern, and I could see, well, that's got to be Adolph Both, the brakeman. And the other would be my dad. I'm a believer. I think that it had to come. Somehow, they had to get it out, the men. Their spirit would not rest until the truth was known about that damn wreck.
And now, in part because of the hauntings aboard the Spirit of Oregon, the message is getting out. Mary Jane recently dedicated a plaque near the scene of the accident. It's a tribute she hopes will outlast wreckage from the accident rusting nearby.
I do hope that the spirit of Ted Johnson, Adolph Both, and my father know that we know now that it was negligence.
Perhaps now that their story has been told, the 5 men who lost their lives on this line will be at rest.
Yes, it's haunted. It's haunted by something that wants to find peace. That's all it wants. And I think it's heading in that direction.
Although there have been a number of terrifying events on the Spirit of Oregon, it seems that the ghosts on the train are selective about whom they target for vengeance. So far, not a single paying customer has had a haunting experience.
Next,
He was one of the half-dozen most famous men in the world.
if Nikola Tesla was so successful, why did he destroy a large part of Siberia?
Halloween and horror movies just naturally go together. And if you've ever rented an old black and white horror movie, you've seen the wild-eyed, wild-haired mad scientist hunched over a weird contraption spewing electricity. But did you know that that character is based on a real-life American scientist? His name was Nikola Tesla, and there are those who believe that he was mad the night he inadvertently blew up part of Siberia. On June 30th, 1908, a remote area of Siberia known as Tunguska is devastated by a mysterious force 2,000 times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It left no crater or residue, the usual calling card of a meteor or comet. Russian investigators who found metal fragments at the site suggested the blast had been caused by an alien spacecraft colliding with Earth. But a new, compelling theory about the Tunguska incident suggests that a highly concentrated beam of electrical energy caused the total devastation in this region, and that only one man had the scientific knowledge to pull it off.
Nikola Tesla, I feel he's the greatest inventor of the past 500 years. He is a Michelangelo. He is a Leonardo da Vinci of science.
He gave us AC power, the fluorescent light, radio, robotics.
By 1900, he was the emperor of invention. He had eclipsed Edison. He was one of the half-dozen most famous men in the world.
Heady praise for a man we seem to know so little about. When Tesla emigrated to the United States from Croatia in 1884, his dream of working for his hero, Thomas Edison, became a reality. But Tesla's development of a more efficient form of electricity called AC, alternating current, didn't sit well with his new boss, who had already developed the more cumbersome direct current, or DC.
Edison just shut him down. He said, "It's DC here. America, Washington, D.C. Forget this AC stuff. You're working for me. I don't want to hear another word of it."
But AC was superior, as Tesla's biographer Tad Wise points out.
DC is like a fine wine that doesn't travel well. It's a power that cannot be stepped up to extremely high frequencies, whereas AC can be transported in these extremely high voltages and then stepped down very safely to be used in a home or school or a factory.
Tesla's brilliant discovery so impressed industrialist George Westinghouse that he enlisted Tesla in his bid to harness the hydroelectric power of Niagara Falls. Finally, the movers and shakers of the day were noticing Tesla.
He met Kipling, he became a good friend of Mark Twain's, and he met all the millionaires. He made a point of meeting all the millionaires.
One of those millionaires was J.P. Morgan.
And J.P. Morgan was the fellow that gave him $150,000, probably the equivalent of $10 million or better today, to build Wardenclyffe.
Wardenclyffe was the name Tesla chose for what he believed would be his greatest contribution. A huge transmitter that would provide electrical power to the world without the use of wires.
What he didn't tell Morgan was that he wanted to send power to the world for free.
Journalist Ellen Sherman believes this was the beginning of the end for Wardenclyffe.
J.P. Morgan did not want to back something that was going to give free energy to people who he could put no meter on. He could not get any money from it whatsoever.
When Morgan pulled his support, he not only ended Tesla's career as the major scientist of his day, But he made laughingstock of it in the eyes of his scientific peers. When that was all pulled away from him, he was a desperate man on any number of fronts.
And that desperation may have led him to use the partially constructed tower to conduct a fateful experiment in the summer of 1908.
Tesla was something of a showman. He had lost the backing of his principal financial supporters, and he is the kind, or was the kind of person who might try a large public event that would bring attention to his work.
Oliver Nicholson has found evidence that Nikola Tesla may have been planning to aim his electrical beam at the North Pole in order to put on a dramatic light show for Admiral Peary, who was in the midst of his historic expedition. A small miscalculation in distance could have had devastating results.
There was Tesla's research station in Long Island, and I drew the line to Tunguska in Russia. Then, interestingly enough, that line crossed right near the North Pole and came very close to Ellesmere Island, where Peary would be camping over for the winter.
Nicholson and others theorized that Tesla's aim was true, but he grossly underestimated the effect gravity would have on his electrical energy beam.
Instead of this operating as he thought it was going to, there is a tremendous explosion in the Siberian region. Forests are laid flat, reindeer herds disappeared, small towns completely gone.
J.W. McGinnis of the International Tesla Society is convinced that the Tunguska tragedy is linked to Tesla. He disagrees with those who believe Tesla was purposely building a weapon of mass destruction on a global scale.
Of all of the great scientists of this country that went to work for the Manhattan Project, there was one scientist that refused to do that, and that was Nikola Tesla. He did not believe in a general destructive weapon and wanted to introduce something that was a lot more incisive and certainly indefensible, and that was his death ray. This thing was so powerful, it would deliver 50 million volts into an area that was 1/10 of a millionth of an inch in diameter. If you put that much pressure in that small a space, there's nothing that can stand up to it. You could cut a ship in half.
While the U.S. government went ahead with its atomic bomb strategy, a secretive interest in Tesla's work seemed to be at work shortly after his death in 1943.
The day following his death, the FBI, under the auspices of the OAP, which is the Office of Alien Protection, broke into his apartment, broke into his safe, and stole or confiscated all of his papers and effects. Now, the OAP had no business being there. He had been a citizen of the United States since the previous century. So this was a ruse. They needed to get in there somehow.
Recently declassified documents only hint at the great discoveries that may have been hidden in Tesla's safe. He had developed a sophisticated particle beam death ray, and he had the know-how to successfully transmit an enormously powerful wave of electrical current through the atmosphere and halfway across the world. Could it be that through his purloined papers, our government gained knowledge that should, by rights, make Nikola Tesla the father of Star Wars technology?
What they realized was that Tesla was always ahead of his time.
What amazing discoveries did the FBI find inside Tesla's safe at the Hotel New Yorker? We may never know. Shortly after their retrieval, the files disappeared and have not been seen, at least not publicly, since then.
Next, dramatic new evidence that our government is covering up the truth about Roswell and what Americans really believe about UFOs. You might be surprised.
Here are some of the stories that Sightings is following in the news. After more than 45 years, the federal government's General Accounting Office has finally started auditing government records to determine what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico. In Washington, D.C., America's auditor, the General Accounting Office, has finally released the results of their full-scale Roswell investigation. The investigation was prompted by citizen protest and by demands by New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff, who insisted that all documents relating to Roswell be released.
I have confidence the GAO will bring forward anything they find with respect to the Roswell incident.
The result is a terse report, nearly as inconclusive as the famous saucer crash itself. 15 government agencies complied, including the FBI, CIA, Army, Air Force, and Navy. However, few documents were turned over. The GAO report states that nearly every relevant record from Roswell Army Airfield has been destroyed, and that it is not known who destroyed the records or under what authority. While the U.S. Air Force has explained the Roswell incident as the crash of a classified balloon project aimed at the Soviet Union, the National Security Council, the CIA, and the Office of Science and Technology have no record of such an operation. The report concludes that the GAO's findings are inconclusive, fueling rather than dispelling the Roswell mystery. In a related news story from Ohio, a statewide survey by Scripps Howard News Service and Ohio University has found that a majority of Americans believe in UFOs.
We interviewed 1,006 people. We had people in every area code in terms of age, education, income. So it does represent the entire country.
UFOs were a new topic for this biannual poll, which is designed to survey our attitudes about government.
We put the question about flying saucers in as another kind of dimension of how people feel about what government does and says.
The question posed was this: do you believe that UFOs are real and that the government is hiding what it knows?
50% of the people said it was very likely or likely that flying saucers are real and the government was hiding the truth from us. 43% said it was not likely that saucers are real and the government was hiding the truth.
That means that half of all Americans not only believe in UFOs, they also believe that the government is covering up the truth of their existence. And it's an opinion that crosses all age, gender, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines.
There is some evidence, after all, that the government hides things from us. You can dismiss a lot of these, but there are some of them you can't explain.
In Tibet, China's inner kingdom is considered one of the most spiritual places on Earth. The leaders for life of this autonomous region are called lamas, the holiest of all Buddhist monks. Although the exiled Dalai Lama is perhaps more famous to Westerners, since 1959, the people of Tibet have been led by the Panchen Lama. But recently, the 10th Panchen Lama passed on, and the search for his successor began. Because Tibetan Buddhists believe in rebirth and reincarnation, the new Panchen Lama had to be the reincarnated spirit of the old Panchen Lama.
What happens is the Tibetan government sends out word that they're looking for a reincarnation. And they're asking whether there are any unusual children who have been born recently, ones having unusual knowledge, or ones who are born in the midst of miraculous activities.
Dr. Jeffrey Hopkins is a professor of religious studies at the University of Virginia. He has written over 20 books on Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism.
Once they've narrowed down the candidates somewhat, they'll test those candidates by asking the child to choose, for instance, a rosary used by the Lama in the last lifetime as opposed to another one.
Monks from the Panchen Lama's monastery believe they have recognized the spirit of their former leader and spiritual teacher reincarnated in the body of a young boy. But Tibet is part of China, and the secular Chinese government is demanding a role in choosing and educating the new Lama. The decision has outraged Tibetans because the care of its most spiritual leader is a task that has been left mostly to Tibetan monks since the 18th century. Dr. Hopkins believes the government's motivation is obvious.
As British spies used to say, there's no way of controlling Tibet without controlling or having a Lama on your side.
We'll have more stories from the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up on Sightings.
Why Mercy Brown's final resting place was anything but restful.
There was a vague power or spirit that was in the grave that was draining the life of the living.
And the man behind the alien autopsy film speaks out.
On Halloween, tens of thousands of make-believe Count Draculas roam the countryside, blood dripping from their plastic fangs. Impersonating the fictional vampire is a popular and harmless tradition. But 100 years ago, there was a real cult of vampires who roamed the New England countryside. They performed grisly acts, digging up grave sites and defiling the remains.
One biographer of Count Dracula referred to Rhode Island as the Transylvania of America, meaning that more vampire incidents have happened here than anywhere else in the country, which is probably true.
In an old cemetery just outside of Exeter, Rhode Island, is the grave of Mercy Brown. You would never know by looking at it, but this is perhaps the most famous site in the history of American vampirism.
Mercy Brown was just the farmer's daughter. Nothing remarkable about her apart from the fact that her body was exhumed and her heart was cut out. What do you think of when someone mentions the term vampire?
Michael Bell is a folklorist who specializes in the study of New England's vampires. He's lecturing on the life story of Mercy Brown and how her own brother came to consume her blood-drenched heart.
Mercy Brown probably is in the forefront of importance in terms of the vampire practice in America because she's the most well-known and, as far as I can determine, the very last case.
Mercy Brown was born in Exeter in 1873, a town some of her descendants, including Lewis Peck, still call home.
Exeter was a farming, log-cutting, wood-cutting town. Timber and farming. Exeter, that's what Exeter people were.
Mercy attended a one-room schoolhouse and led a typical New England farm life. But as she grew up, her family grew ill. She watched helplessly as her mother and sister died from consumption, what we know today is tuberculosis.
In the meantime, Mercy Brown became ill with consumption, and it was a kind called galloping consumption, and so it progressed very rapidly.
In January of 1892, at the age of 19, Mercy died. Her surviving family feared Mercy's brother would be the next to go.
The general belief was there was a vague force or power or spirit that was in the grave that was draining the life of the living.
In an effort to stop the inexorable march of the disease, the bodies of the Brown family were unearthed to determine which corpse was draining the life from the living.
If you knew nothing else to do, what would you do? Try anything.
Well, the mother and the first daughter were basically decomposed the way they thought they should be. But when they came to Mercy, she looked too fresh.
They come back here, dug her up, found her turned on her side, which, how do you turn on your side if you're buried?
The 19th century gravediggers knew nothing of forensic science. They saw what they believed to be unnatural hair growth, nail growth, and a heart still full of blood. Mercy was considered to be one of the undead.
Well, she'd only been dead a few months before they exhumed the body, and these were winter months, so the rate of decomposition would have been quite slow to begin with.
Paul Sledzik is a forensic anthropologist with the National Museum of Health and Medicine, who has also studied the Mercy Brown case.
They would be looking for things like lengthening of the fingernails, which is actually not lengthening the fingernails, but just receding of the tissues underneath, so it appears as though the fingernails have grown. They also look for evidence of new skin, of like a whitish skin appearing over the reddish old skin. That's also just a byproduct of decomposition. It's called skin slippage.
On a bitter cold night, Mercy's heart was torn from her body, burned, and the ashes mixed with water for her sick brother to drink. Although he died soon after, he was the last member of the family to succumb to the disease.
So they thought for sure that they had got the vampire. And all the time, it was tuberculosis.
Mercy was not alone. Researchers have uncovered more than 15 incidents in which corpses were exhumed and then consumed. In 1990, Paul Sledzik discovered this defiled burial site in rural Connecticut.
Upon starting to excavate the graves, they found one particular burial that intrigued them because the bones had been rearranged after death.
The skeleton had been tampered with years after his death. The bones had been separated and rearranged in a skull and crossbones configuration, a ritual designed to keep the undead in their graves.
Well, if you look generally at the New England folklore about how to kill a vampire, they're essentially causing disruption to the corpse. In the Mercy Brown case, they're removing the heart and burning it. They're just trying to cause some disruption to the normal appearance of a body within the grave.
But did the ritual performed on Mercy Brown work?
This is where we were told not to play.
According to Peck, all is still not quiet at the Brown family plot. He recalls a night many years ago when he saw an unnatural force rise up from the grave of Mercy Brown.
And I'm in my 20s, and it's in the wintertime. So we pull in here. And in this same direction to where I'm sitting now, about 3 feet off the ground was a ball of bright light. So bright that it was blue. I don't know where it come from, and I don't know where it went to. And we went to the corner to where another relative of mine lived. We told him what we'd just seen, and he laughed and he said, "It's been seen before."
The gruesome acts performed by the vampire cult of the last century were the natural result of ignorance, fear, and superstition. But they were also based on a belief in supernatural forces that continue to be cited in this century.
In that field, I guess she's made quite a history, without a heart.
Bram Stoker, the creator of the original Dracula, is believed to have based his character on a 15th century barbarian called Vlad the Impaler. But among Bram Stoker's original notes for his novel, researchers recently found a newspaper clipping from 1892. It was a report on the bizarre case of Mercy Brown.
Next, an elaborate hoax or the real thing? Sightings goes to the source.
Once the film is deemed to be real or not, we can then decide how we're going to move forward.
Ray Santilli is the most sought-after man in ufology today. Santilli claims that he has found film footage of a government autopsy of an extraterrestrial. His supporters believe Santilli has uncovered the conspiracy of the century. His critics cry foul. Now, in a rare interview with Sightings correspondent Carla Wohl, Ray Santilli answers charges that he is closer to P.T. Barnum than to Woodward and Bernstein.
Ray Santilli claims he's just a businessman with absolutely no interest in UFOs. Yet we have only this man's word for the UFO story of the decade. Santilli claims he's blown the lid off the Roswell saucer crash mystery. In 1993, Santilli says he was researching a music documentary, searching for footage of Elvis Presley, when a former U.S. military cameraman sold him some footage that is out of this world. This, according to Santilli, is film of an autopsy being performed on an extraterrestrial life form which died following the impact at the Roswell crash site. Santilli bought it, marketed it, and sold the rights to television producers around the world. It's already aired twice here in the United States. Stills taken from the film can be found on nearly 200 websites on the internet, usually accompanied by a lively debate about their authenticity. Is the film proof that aliens have in fact landed on planet Earth? Or is it an elaborate hoax?
As we sit here talking, I don't think there's a shred of evidence to suggest that the film is a hoax.
In a rare interview, Ray Santilli agreed to talk to Sightings about his motives, the film, and what some critics are saying about it.
First, let's talk about what some special effects people are saying. We've talked to two highly respected people, one here in England, one in the United States, and both say that's a fake body. Not a bad fake body, but nevertheless a fake body.
Well, that's the opinion of the special effects company that you visited and saw. However, you know, a special effects company can have you and I sitting in a car with John F. Kennedy driving down Dealey Plaza. That's the job they're in. They can recreate anything. I mean, recreating something and the event itself are two separate issues.
Amid the hype and promotion surrounding the release of this film were claims that then-President Harry Truman was among the witnesses at the autopsy.
No one has yet seen that footage.
No, in fact.
And in fact, the Truman Library says that there's no record of him being in that area during that time.
Firstly, President Truman is listed on one of the canisters as being there at the autopsy. Our cameraman confirms quite categorically that he was there. The Truman Library states that he couldn't have been there, he was somewhere else. Now, I don't know, you know, if the
Have you seen him on the film?
No, but if the event occurred, as we believe it did, and, you know, quite a few people have kept quiet, would the Truman Library actually have information that we could rely upon if it was such a secret operation? I don't know. But it is a discrepancy.
If this was such a top secret thing, how could a cameraman get 22 reels of film and it never be investigated and them not track it down? How is that possible?
That's an incredible story itself. He shot hundreds of canisters of film during the event itself. Each of the canisters or reels of film were 3 minutes in duration, and he separated during the filming reels that he felt were problem reels. He'd sent the remainder straight on to Washington, and he spent more time on the 22 reels of film which he'd processed or whatever. And once he'd got to the stage where he felt he could send them on, he called Washington and asked them to pick up the film, collect the film, and he tried on numerous occasions, but they just failed to do so.
Who is this mysterious cameraman, and why did he wait 45 years to sell his film? Santilli says we may never know the answer.
Whether he decides to talk and you know, give his story to the public is something that's in his control.
Why not?
However,
Why not? I mean, wouldn't it clear everything up if he came...
In your mind and in the mind of the world and people that are interested in the subject. But, you know, this guy is in his mid-80s. He's not interested in the subject. That's the first point. Secondly, he's got his family to consider, and his family are his only consideration. He doesn't want to lose his pension. He doesn't want to lose his position in society.
But why would he?
Because
what's at risk by coming out?
Because you're media, I'm media, and as far as the media is concerned, this is a great story, and wouldn't it be wonderful if he came out, because it would really then be a really fantastic story.
I have a letter right here from Congressman Steve Schiff, and he says that he offered to take the film to the U.S. government to see if they could authenticate it, and that, I'm quoting now, the Santilli Group has not accepted my offer.
I've never seen an offer. I've never seen that letter before.
Will you give it to Congressman Schiff, though, directly? Why not? I mean, why not try and authenticate it at this point?
We have a relationship, a contractual relationship with Kvyat Green and Fox, and it's up to them what they do with it.
Does that contractual relationship prohibit going to a congressman?
Let me just make one point very clear. I have no interest in the subject of UFOs or the paranormal. Okay. I do not have the ability to research or investigate the footage. Therefore, we appointed broadcasters in various territories, and the responsibility is with them.
Well, you have made no bones about the fact that you are a businessman, and that your business is marketing, and you've done a heck of a job marketing this film. I think you've probably made a bundle from it.
Haven't made, in terms of profit, we haven't made our money back by any stretch of the imagination. The ultimate aim is commerciality, but we still have to get past that first hurdle. We have to satisfy broadcasters, we have to satisfy the world of ufology and the general public.
But they haven't been satisfied in terms of the authenticity. So don't you have some obligation to try and do
you're
that?
At the very start of it, you know, it will go on, and once the film is deemed to be real or not, we can then decide, you know, how we're going to move forward. But we're still at those very early stages.
Despite Ray Santilli's claim that he has exposed the UFO scandal of the century, most Roswell researchers are distancing themselves from the film. They believe that if and when the footage is proven to be a hoax, the serious strides that they have made in unraveling the Roswell mystery may also be called into question.
Next, does this man have the final word about the Loch Ness Monster?
What a lot of people don't realize is that the familiar Nessie image is only a cropped close-up.
In 1994, a story was circulated that Christian Sperling had gone to his grave claiming that he had faked the world's most famous photograph of the Loch Ness Monster. But now, New Jersey researcher Richard Smith believes that he has found evidence that Sperling's deathbed confession may have been the biggest hoax of all.
On the morning of April the 19th, 1934, Lieutenant Colonel R. Kenneth Wilson, who was also a practicing physician in London, was on a vacation in the Highlands of Scotland. And he claimed to have stopped his car along one of the shores of this immense lake, Loch Ness, and seen a disturbance in the water, and seen the head and neck of a large animal emerge. made some exposures of plates, went up to the city of Inverness and had them developed. And one of the results was, of course, the most famous of all Nessie images.
You could say it's the face that launched 1,000 ships. This is the most enduring image we have of the elusive Loch Ness Monster. The photo was judged authentic until last year, when newspapers reported it was a hoax. But Richard Smith believes he has new evidence that proves this photo is real.
Recently, there have been widely publicized allegations that Colonel Wilson was actually part of a conspiracy and that the object in the photograph is a modified toy submarine which has a plastic wood neck on it. And these sensational claims were made by a man by the name of Christian Sperling. Frankly, Christian Sperling's story is full of holes that are big enough for a Nessie to swim through.
Christian Sperling was a confidant of M.A. Weatherall, who first gained fame in 1934 during his highly publicized but futile attempt to capture the Loch Ness Monster. After this failure, according to Sperling, he and Weatherall concocted a plan to take faked photos of Nessie and then switch them with photos their unsuspecting friend, Colonel Wilson, was about to develop.
The major claim is made that this alleged toy submarine with the neck on it was floated in a small bay. What a lot of people don't realize is that the familiar Nessie image is only a cropped close-up taken from the original picture. The original picture clearly shows a wide central expanse of this immense lake with the opposite shoreline clearly visible. It's not a small bay. There's also something which is extremely interesting and the public is not generally aware of, which is that Colonel Wilson was able to get 2 exposures of this object.
This second photo has rarely been seen by anyone except a handful of Nessie experts.
It's very important because the head and neck in this picture are now rather straightened out, unlike the first photo where they're at a right angle. And this shows that this object, whatever it is not made of unbending plastic wood, as Christian Sperling claimed. But what's even more significant is the fact that Christian Sperling apparently did not know about this photograph.
Is this photo real? It's an interesting puzzle, but according to Nessie investigator Adrian Shine, in the end, the photo is immaterial.
The Loch Ness Monster lives in people's minds and cannot be dislodged from there. It doesn't matter how many photographs are disproved, it doesn't matter what the scientific implications are. The Loch Ness Monster is something which does exist and will always exist because people want it to exist.
In recent months, the only sightings of the Loch Ness Monster have been on T-shirts and coffee mugs. Scientific research on the existence of real-life lake monsters has now moved west to the freshwater lakes of North America. Unlike Loch Ness, sightings on this side of the Atlantic are up.
If you've had a paranormal experience, please write to us at Sightings. Sightings can also be contacted at America Online at keyword Sightings. At the Sightings Forum, download images, sounds, and QuickTime clips. Also join us for Monday evening chat sessions live on AOL.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.
Next on Sci-Fi, Dark Shadows.
The soldier, the healer, the backstabber, the temptress, the brains, the muscle, and one guy stuck in the middle.
You wanna run that by me one more time?
What they wanted was a way home.
Pilot, break orbit.
What they got was each other.
I love hanging with you, man.
Experience the best sci-fi show on television from the beginning. Farscape, Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. on Sci-Fi.
Thank you.